Your understanding that the president has decided that what Israel has done in Rafah so far crosses the red line?
We have not yet seen indication of a major military operation. So that's something that we're watching closely. But when we look at a potential operation in Rafah, the president made clear that we are not going to provide them certain weapons that they could use in such an operation. We have been quite clear with the government of Israel for some time that we are opposed to a major Rafah operation. As I said, there is no doubt that they understood what our policy was should they launch a Rafah operation, or what our policy would be, I should say.
I know there is, or what you guys keep saying, that there's no major operation, but there are little tiny operations. They just killed a family of 8, last night in an area that is to the west, not to the south or to the east, and Tel Sultan. I mean, I don't want to name all their names, but 4 were children, Ahmed Abdurrahman, 10 years old, Lana Nahed, 12 years old, Muhammad Ramzi Lulu, 5 years old, Jana Muhammad Lulu, 1 year old. I mean, so these things go on day in and day out.
And every one of those deaths is an absolute tragedy, Saeed.
Right. But, I mean, it is obvious that the Israelis are not heeding the president's call.
They previously haven't wanted to talk about drawing red lines, but Israel is continuing to strike Rafah, and they're continuing to order the evacuation of large numbers of civilians. So how will you assess when it has crossed over into a full-scale offensive from the current operations that are happening now?
We're watching this very closely, as you are. We're consulting closely with the Israelis. We're collecting our own assessment of what's happening on the ground. The Israeli Defense Forces have indicated to us that the operations they are currently pursuing are targeted. They are not the kind of massive military operation that we have talked about. We'll make our own judgment on that as we see things unfold, and it will be based on a totality of factors. It's not a mathematical formula or a mechanical determination. It's something we will judge based on what we see, and the president will then make his determinations. We have not seen that happen yet.
We have yet to see a major operation into Rafah.
Isn't forcing 500,000 people to move, with forcing them to move out of Rafah to a nowhere, whereas nowhere is safe, isn't it by itself a violation of international law?
So we have been pretty clear, Nadia, that there can be no forcible relocation of the Palestinian
people. But if
people.
they stay, they're going to die.
That continues to be a tenet of our approach. But ultimately, we do support efforts to support Israel's goal of dismantling Hamas. But like I said, we do not want to see a major operation into Rafah, and we have not seen one yet that we would take issue with.
What we understand, what we know, what we're seeing in Rafah right now, according to what Israel has shared with us, it is limited, targeted operations. That's what we've been told, and we have been very clear. We have been very clear about how we feel about our concerns, privately and publicly, about a potential major operation in Rafah. We have been very clear about the more than 1 million people who are living, who are now seeking refuge, to be more exact, in Rafah, and we want to make sure that their lives are protected. These are innocent civilian lives. We want to make sure that they are protected.
I just wanted to be a little more granular on Rafah.
Yeah.
You said the Israeli government had told you there are limited targeted operations. Yeah. Is the White House concerned that Israel is making a very incremental sort of incursion into Rafah to make it harder for you guys to say, that the red line has been crossed?
I'm not going to get into a red line from here. What I will say is, obviously, IDF can speak to their own operations. What we've been told, and as you just stated in your question to me, these are targeted, limited operations, and so far it does not appear to be a major ground operation, and we have been warning about that. We've been very clear about that. You heard that from Jake Sullivan yesterday, our national security advisor. You've heard that many times from here, from us. We of course are monitoring the situation. Our longstanding concerns over a potential major ground operation.
IDF says that it has intensified military operations in specific areas of eastern Rafah. Can you first confirm whether it's still the U.S.'s assessment that this is not the full-scale, full incursion into Rafah that the president has been warning about.
So look, what I will say, and I'm going to be pretty consistent from here, going to be pretty boring, I guess, for the next few minutes or so at this podium behind this lectern, which is we're monitoring the situation. We've been told, and what we see, it is a targeted, limited operation in Rafah. That is what we're seeing. I can't go like by report here. That is not something that I'm going to do from here. We have made our concerns very clear, publicly and privately, about a potential major operations offensive in Rafah.
Last week to CNN, President Biden said that he made it clear that if the Israeli government goes into Rafah, I will not be supplying weapons that have been used historically to deal with cities. Of course, we've seen the Israelis use tanks in urban centers throughout this war, and in the latest arms package, which is now on its way, expected to be approved, and was after Biden issued that statement, is $700 million in tank ammunition. So this statement appears to be false. Is it the Pentagon's assessment that tanks will not be used in the invasion of Rafah?
I think you're significantly oversimplifying things.
I made it clear that if they go into Rafah, they haven't gone into Rafah yet. If they go into Rafah, I'm not supplying the weapons that have been used historically to deal with Rafah, to deal with the cities, to deal with that problem. We're going to continue to make sure Israel is secure in terms of Iron Dome and their ability to respond to attacks like came out of the Middle East recently. But it's just wrong. We're not going to supply the weapons and the artillery shells used that have been used.
Artillery shells as well.
Yeah, artillery shells.
So what I would tell you to do is to do a little homework on the package that was approved, and that this is long-term sales that will be going to Israel, and the State Department would have more for you on that. In terms of operating within an urban area, the Secretary, the President have been very clear that these type of high payload bombs, the 2,000-pound bombs, it's not necessary to be used in an urban area like Rafah. We are still, and I want to be very clear, we are still providing Israel the means to defend itself against its fight against Hamas. And you are still seeing shipments of weapon systems going to Israel, and will continue to go through. That is a commitment this president has made.
But in the shipment that is not paused is $700 million in tank munitions. And are you saying that, I can read you the Biden quote again, I just read it to you.
You don't have to.
Okay.
I know it. Yeah.
He said we're not going to supply weapons that have been.
Yeah. You don't have to read it to me. I would direct you to. Yeah.
Tanks haven't been used in cities in Gaza.
I would direct you to the State Department for more on the sales. That has to do with sales to Israel. I just don't have that in front of me. Rio.
So we are providing.
I'm going to move on to the next question.
I have a question about Rafah. Over the course of the past several days, since May 7th, when Israel first went into Rafah, you called it a limited operation, and yet we have seen Israel push farther and farther in. Do you still believe this operation is limited, or is this simply a full-scale invasion in incremental stages?
We do not believe that at this time, right now, that this is a full-scale invasion. We still assess that it is limited, and what the IDF is doing is limited in its operations.
The IDF is announcing plans as recently as today to expand the Rafah operation. And meanwhile, people that we've spoken with on the ground say that that they perceive what is already a full-fledged operation. Given the Biden administration's statement that it will not support a full-fledged invasion of Rafah without a coherent evacuation and humanitarian plan, are you prepared to declare that it's a full-fledged invasion if these actions go ahead?
Yeah, again, I've seen what was reported that Minister Gallant said. I look forward to talking to him about what his plans really are, and also talking with Jake Sullivan as well. And I really don't want to speculate as to whether or not this is or is not or will be a larger operation. I really would like to see what what they intend to do. But even if there are if there is kinetic activity, if there is an operation that is conducted that's larger, we certainly would like to see things done differently, more precise, and less destruction of the civilian structures, and more protection of the civilian population.
it is possible to conduct operations and also account for civilians in the battle space. And I wonder, on Rafah, given your extensive military experience, what you're seeing happen in Rafah right now, do you think that Israel is doing that, conducting their operations and accounting for civilians in the battle space?
So regarding what Israel's doing inside Rafah, what we've seen thus far is a limited action that's been focused on the Rafah border crossing.
We are deeply saddened by the tragic loss of life in Rafah over the weekend. Like many of you, I'm sure, I watched the videos that emerged from the fire that broke out in the camp there this weekend. Those images were heartbreaking, and I know the pain that those families are suffering through must be unimaginable, especially those who lost children and those who have lost family members for a repeated number of times. As we have said before, Israel has a right to go after the Hamas terrorists responsible for the cold-blooded murder of civilians, as appears to have been Israel's aim here, and Hamas should stop hiding behind civilians in Gaza.
Just last week he said he needed to see things done a lot differently, and this was a strike done adjacent to a displacement camp. I guess what I'm trying to understand is why does the Secretary continue to support these kinds of operations in Rafah on sites where it's not clear that the risk was so imminent that it required conducting such a strike adjacent to a camp? You mentioned several times that he mentioned this in his calls with his Israeli counterpart, but I think we've been hearing that for months, and it doesn't seem to be changing the course. So having a hard time understanding why he continues to support the Rafah operation as it's been carried out thus far.
Thanks, Nancy, for the question. So I think we have to separate things a bit. I don't think you mean this, but I think the question is implying that we're somehow green-lighting Israeli operations as they happen in Rafah. We have to make this very, very clear. We're not on the ground. Not our operations. We have nothing to do with how they conduct operations on the ground. And as the Secretary has said, we don't support a large-scale operation within Rafah. We are seeing movements within Rafah. We are, of course, seeing the imagery that came from the strike that happened over the weekend. No matter what anyone says, those images, what's happening on the ground, it's horrific, it's heartbreaking, and it needs to stop. We also have to remember that we are supporting Israel in their fight against Hamas. And this is a terrorist organization that embeds itself within tunnels, that is using hostages, innocent civilians as human shields, and continues to do so. So we are going to support Israel as they work to defeat Hamas, but we're also going to continue to tell Israel, both publicly and privately, that absolutely more can be done and should be done. And we're not hesitating from that. And every time the Secretary has a conversation with Minister Gallant, it is direct, it is very frank, and it's respectful, but he is very direct. And, I think, again, we're going to continue to say that from here, both publicly and privately, but I have to urge you to remember that this is not our operation. We're not on the ground, and therefore we're not calling the shots as they happen.
I appreciate that, but the U.S. is providing weapons. I'm trying to understand if we can get a list of. I can't think of an instance where the U.S. has conducted a strike so near a displacement camp, and I'm just trying to ask if there's a way if that would be a question to take in case there's something I'm missing.
Yeah, again, totally hear your question, but just again, if I take that question, we're comparing apples and oranges, and right now the U.S. is not on the ground in Gaza. So let me just holistically, what we are looking at right now is an operation in Rafah or in Gaza that the United States government has nothing to do with. That has nothing. We're not on the ground. This is not our operation. Yes, we are continuing to provide Israel with the weapons it needs to defeat Hamas, and we certainly welcome the reports. I think overnight or early this morning that an investigation has been opened to look into this incident. Environment where they have a very intricate network of tunnel systems that, frankly, we have not been up against. So again, it's comparing apples and oranges here. So I urge you to take a step back here, and I understand the question, I understand the intent behind it, but I do just have to urge that these are two very different situations.
Okay, I appreciate it. If you and I taking it, that'd be great.
All right, I'm gonna move on, but yep.
Just a second ago, you said you guys have nothing to do with what's going on the ground.
Correct. We have no boots on the ground. It's not our military operation.
The administration in recent weeks has withheld weapon shipments for reasons that have been said to, I guess, alter or prevent the Israelis from doing what the U.S. doesn't want to happen in Rafah. So is it still the Pentagon's assessment this is a limited, what was the terminology used here?
Limited operation.
Is that still the assessment?
That is right now. It is still our assessment that what is happening in Rafah and what the IDF are doing, it is limited in scope.
And so what is the department's assessment of what happened over the weekend?
Well, we're still waiting to see the results of the investigation, which was just started by the IDF, I believe, this weekend. They have released some initial findings about that, that strike that occurred, but I don't really want to get ahead of the investigation. We need to see what they present us, and then, happy to get back to you on that.
I just wanted to ask a separate question about Rafah, but there have been some reports today that of Israeli tanks in central Rafah.
Yeah.
I was wondering if you could verify that information, and then also Israel has said it's expanding its operation in Rafah. So does DoD still assess that this is a limited operation?
Yeah, nothing has changed from what I said earlier. We still assess it's a limited operation. I've seen those reports. We are seeing movement within Rafah. That doesn't mean that its limitation and its scope and scale has changed.
So I asked you a question about 21 days, 3 weeks ago here, about this vague distinction between a major military operation and a limited military operation in Rafah. And you said, quote, a military operation would put at risk civilian lives, and they're against anything that puts civilian lives at risk. On Sunday, it not only put civilian lives at risk, it burnt them alive and decapitated a child. Is this policy of major, limited, supportive, non-supportive, is this policy not failed, would you not say? And is this not enabling the Israeli government to do whatever they like? Because it's limited, but it burned 45 people. So what, that's kind of the stance in the Israeli government.
Well, we certainly take seriously what happened over the weekend. We've all seen the images. They're absolutely horrific. To Nancy's question earlier, I mentioned that the secretary has very direct and frank conversations with his counterpart. That's exactly what they are. They are tough conversations, and we do have them with our friends. And we are going to continue to do that. Do we support what happened over the weekend? Of course we don't want to see a loss of life like that. We don't want to see these images as much as you don't. And it certainly speaks to the challenges of what's happening on the ground, but we absolutely want to see innocent lives protected. And that's why publicly, privately, we're going to continue to urge the IDF, when they conduct operations, to take into account civilian casualties.
This has not crossed the red line that the president laid out, several weeks ago. This is the second incident in less than 2 weeks where we've seen a pretty large civilian toll on what was supposed to be a precision strike.
So with respect to the policy that the president announced, he was speaking specifically to a large-scale operation in Rafah, and we have not yet seen a large-scale operation conducted in Rafah.
There's reporting that they've sort of gone deeper into the city, reaching the beach. I think the Israeli military themselves said they struck 45 targets over the past day. Does this constitute the full-scale operation that you've been warning about?
It continues to be something we're watching incredibly closely, but we still have not yet seen them launch what looks like a full-scale major military operation.
How many more charred corpses does he have to see before the president considers a change in policy?
We don't want to see a single more innocent life taken, and I kind of take a little offense at the question. No civilian casualties is the right number of civilian casualties, and this is not something that we've turned a blind eye to, nor has it been something we've ignored or neglected to raise with our Israeli counterparts, including, Ed, this weekend as a result of this particular strike. Now, they're investigating it, so let's let them investigate it and see what they come up with.
But the president doesn't have a personal limit to this?
The president has been very clear and very direct about what our expectations are for Israeli operations in Rafah specifically, but in Gaza writ large. We don't support, we won't support a major ground operation in Rafah, and we've, again, been very consistent on that. And the president said that should that occur, then it might make him have to make different decisions in terms of support. We haven't seen that happen at this point.